Let's get straight to it. Guantanamo Bay, a place that you and I know well, having been in Miami and in Florida. Maybe a lot of people don't know. There's the military facility, but then they also have a separate detention facility for migrants. And listen, the military facility, they keep the detainees after the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. But we're hearing, and we know, the vice president of the National Immigration Law Center saying, report upon report of conditions in those detention facilities that don't provide basic health care. They shackle women when pregnant, and they haven't had protections for communicable diseases such as COVID. I mean, Paola, the continued dehumanization of migrants is the goal here, right?
That's exactly right. I think the first thing that comes to mind when you mention Guantanamo, when you mention that report, is war on terror. And that is precisely the point. That is what Donald Trump wants us to think about. Look, I think if you take a step back, and you look at all of these images that we have been bombarded with just this week, Katie, you see the ICE raids, you see troops deploying to the border. You see the images of military planes carrying migrants, and now the image of Guantanamo Bay. The point is precisely to get this country to believe that we are entering, this new chapter on the war on terror. And it makes sense. For over a year, and you and I have been talking about this for so long, for over a year, Donald Trump made millions of Americans believe that we were not only being invaded by migrants, but he used one very clear word. He said we are also being conquered by migrants. And so the point that we are in right now is for Donald Trump to continue to condition Americans to believe that story and to now believe that the next iteration of that story means to defeat them. And to defeat them, meaning the terrorists. So I think what Guantanamo Bay brings up, what scares me at least, is that history tells us that when, as Americans, we sort of enter this paranoid state that we're in, we do have a tendency to turn a blind eye on the violations that happen in Guantanamo Bay. We have a tendency to turn a blind eye on the human rights violations, the abuses, and all of the darkness that has happened there, and that is exactly where we are. So our job is to ensure that we don't turn a blind eye, that we don't allow history to repeat itself.
Paola, I think what's so important to underscore here is these ICE raids that are happening right now. They are indiscriminate in terms of who they are collecting and picking up and who they're detaining. They're actually, it's the reverse of due process, right? It's, I'm going to take everybody who's brown and black, and then I'm going to make you prove that you're the U.S. citizen, versus ICE saying, I know you're not a U.S. citizen, and I'm here to be able to take you. Furthermore, the illegal moniker that is being put on migrants has now been completely distorted, because folks that had temporary protected status, for example, from Venezuela, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, people like that now have lost that status through the revocation of that was afforded to them under the Biden administration. And that means that they are now here illegally. When you put them all in Guantanamo and you put it in an overtaxed system like this government that doesn't even know what they're doing with them, you're putting women, children, men indiscriminately together. And this facility, you don't let lawyers that don't get to go there, Paola. You don't just get on a plane and you're a lawyer and just there. It's almost impossible to be able to provide them with any type of due process.
No, that's exactly right. But I think one of the things that you mentioned, I think, is very important to name, and that is you mentioned Cubans and Venezuelans that are, for instance, part of this humanitarian parole program that Donald Trump has ended. I mentioned this because I think one of the things that is happening, and you talked about it in the previous block, they're trying to confuse us. There's so much sort of happening in front of us that we're losing sight of the paradoxes, the hypocrisies, and to your point, the human cost of all of this, right? One of the things that he said is that he is ending humanitarian parole. Well, what that means is that it is essentially forcing, for example, Cubans, ridding them of an opportunity to come to the United States, ridding Cubans that are part of the very same communist regime that Donald Trump sort of casts himself as this anti-communist hero. And another thing that he's doing, is ending temporary protected status for Venezuelans. Once again, that means that sooner rather than later, thousands and hundreds and thousands of Venezuelans could soon be deported back to Nicolás Maduro's regime, the very same regime that Donald Trump himself has called a dictator. And so I think it's important to say this, because one of the reasons why Donald Trump was able to win Miami-Dade County is because of the Cuban-American vote and the Venezuelan vote. And so this is a time to understand if, as a country, we will feel that sort of moral collective outrage that is necessary during times like these. Necessary to ensure that those human rights violations don't happen in Guantanamo Bay, but also necessary to understand the paradox that is happening in front of our eyes, where Donald Trump is essentially forcing people to live in those very same communist regimes and dictators that he himself claimed to want to protect us all from.